the consent agenda. So, need a motion for that.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion, changes, edits? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? I have no correspondence on like that.
Nope.
And, what's the superintendent's report?
Sure. Pleased to really welcome administration and some staff from Clark Lane Middle School. They presented earlier this fall about the beginnings of PBIS. They're back here tonight to report some outstanding results and progress on PBIS. In addition to that, we're going to hear a little bit more about their mastery-based learning work over the last 2 years and where they stand this year and what lies ahead. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Jim Sachs, principal of Clark Lane Middle School, and he'll introduce the rest of his team.
Thanks, Mr. Jarrett. Thank you for having us. Really appreciate it. I want to introduce our co-presenters for this evening. Mark Higgins is our curriculum leader for Social Studies and History. He's also a Social Studies and Histories teacher. Audrey Montanaro, curriculum leader for PE and Health. She teaches health and wellness. And of course, Tracy Moore, my assistant principal. So we were here earlier in the year to talk about two pretty big initiatives in our school that focus on improving academic performance by kids and helps with our school climate. So let me sort of bring you through that, and then everyone's going to have a little bit of a chance to talk about their experience with both of these initiatives. So the first is mastery learning, and specifically we're going to tell you in a few minutes about a redo retake policy that our students have been given the opportunity to take advantage of this year. But basically I wanted to give you a little bit of background on mastery learning. It goes back a few decades, and what it really is the variable we're all used to, or the way that we're all taught in this room, is that we were given some content in a certain small period of time, and we were assessed pretty much at the same time, and whatever grade we received, we still moved on to the next set of content. So that's pretty much the pattern for many, many years, decades in America. There's been a lot of research on the variable of time. So if you read that definition, the real difference in mastery learning is that you adjust the time. So students may need a little bit longer to learn something. They're given multiple opportunities to show that, and in many cases different ways to show that, and they have a higher chance of mastering the skill or the content. Think of it like the Air Force model. When they move people through the Air Force to different airplanes, they make sure they 100% know the first plane before they get to the second plane, before they get to the third plane. So they don't ever allow someone with a 70% proficiency on plane A to go to plane B. And obviously you know the result of that would be disaster. So they want to make sure they've absolutely mastered the content along the way. So that's similar to the model we're talking about here, is that we want the students to have a similar curricular experience, similar assessments initially, and then if needed have a little extra time and go from there to show mastery.
Is it mandated that they retake, or is it optional?
It's optional. Yep. So just quickly, we have a small mastery committee that's consisting of our leadership group and a few teachers. Last year we focused on all the foundational work, which is the components of mastery learning. And this year we're focusing on the next stage, which I'll get to in a few slides. But our goal for last year was to sort of educate the entire population of the school, or the teachers of the school, about mastery learning as a general topic, and then move to have a published redo retake policy, which was sort of component A for this past year, and it's in your handbook in front of you on the very last page. I marked it for you. Eventually down the road, we'll have a mastery system in which students will not only have redo retake policy, but they'll have a report card that shows them both their skills and their work ethic separated out. Right now, like most of us are used to, you receive an A, B, C, etc. for a grade for any given subject or task, and there's a lot of things that that grade represents. It could include effort. So eventually in our mastery learning journey, we will have a standard-based report card. Students will be able to redo or retake various assessments, and the curriculum is super tight, so it's very common in every single class in every discipline. That's not to say that we've taken away teachers, rights and abilities to teach in the way they'd like to, but they have some very similar patterns of when they teach certain items and the assessments used.
Jim, could you just talk a little bit about, sounds a little bit like a new teaching method, not too much different, but the importance of coaches in terms of implementing this new teaching method and how it's vital or not vital to the
Right.
success of the program?
That's a great question. So, one great example of an almost completed mastery learning pilot in our school is what we've been doing in the math department. So our math coach researched new materials. He presented those materials to the math department, they piloted them, and then they chose the best material, which was the inquiry model. And then he sat with all of the teachers in all grades and planned out the curriculum so that it was very, very close in every class, every week. The assessments are all the same too. So that when students went through a unit, they then took an assessment, and it wouldn't matter if they're in class A, B, or C, it was the same assessment to show mastery of the content. And what math did last year was they were a year ahead of us, and they already put in a retake policy. So any student could retake anything in math. So which actually by the end of the year brought them to greater mastery, and when they took their standardized tests, we all saw the kind of results we got from it. So that was a almost nearly perfect model, except for, I would say, the report card. We didn't have separated out mastery of skills versus work ethic quite yet. So that's an
And that's
example.
on next year's.
So they've already done that. They did that last year. They're doing that this year, the math department. And the other disciplines are practicing the retake policy, as well as tightening up their curriculum in both what they teach and when they teach it, and assessments.
And when will the coach's mission, if I can call it that, be done with respect to helping implement this program?
I can jump in and say never. And I mean that legitimately. Curriculum, teaching practices are not a static thing. The mission of getting better and a growth mindset is never done. So there's always best practices that are being fine-tuned in education across the country and the spectrum. In regards to the rollout of illustrative math, we're in basically the second full year of implementation around that. But it's never going to be a finite date that in May of 2027 we're done. And it's just not
Right,
the
but
way.
this is a new approach, correct?
Mastery-based learning,
Yes.
new to Waterford, but not, in terms of Clark Lane, it is something that K-5, and Craig could talk more about that if you needed. It's been in Waterford a long time, but it's now being pushed up to middle and high. Craig, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess, Greg, just to kind of be semantically correct. The question was, when a coach is done with this particular program, for which that may have a plateau, if the inference was, when is the coaching work done, which is a slightly different question that I think Tom answered, I would agree with his conclusion, because like when I started here in '99 as a building principal, the kindergarten expectation was to know the alphabet. Now the kindergarten expectation is really to be a fluent reader of easy books. That change required the changing of the teacher's practice. Why we do curricular renewal is because they keep refining and increasing in complexity and rigor the standards for which then we have to rise to and continue to re-educate. It's like a system any business has in service and training is built in. This is the training module component. Now, to the question that Tom answered, could you just reframe it one more time for me?
Yeah, I think Mr. Benoit's follow-up question was around, is mastery learning new? And I said, new to Clark Lane,
Yeah.
perhaps, certainly not new to Waterford.
So, the notion of assessing and moving on kids we always strive to have kids learn as much as they can, but, you know, we did an exercise recently with secondary principals on the frequencies of D's and F's, which would show non-mastery of that content. We then challenged the principals to say, how can we reduce this while keeping our standards high and maintaining a certain level of rigor? And as Jim pointed out, the variable in this is really time. So all kids can learn if given enough time. We're saying that if they don't get it this time, very much just like business or military, they go through a module, you didn't do it, you're gonna have to go through that module again before you advance.
I appreciate that amplification, but my concern was, when did the teachers get to that level that they're comfortable with administering this new program? But I
Yeah,
think
so
you've answered that.
generally speaking, when you bring in a system, it takes 3 to 5 years for the general automaticity into that system. You've been on the board long enough, you probably remember when the introduction of Reader's Workshop came in, and maybe some acrimony around that level of change, because they were going through that new learning. That's now automaticity has set in, we're able to then take on capacity of something else.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good question.
Sure.
My concern is, what percentage of the kids do you think choose not to retake?
Yeah, Marcia, I'm gonna jump in on that.
Yep.
So, while the middle school, I think, has made great strides to set a standard for redo retakes, like this conversation right now, it will evolve. So, I will say, we've had conversations with Jim to say, does all mean all?
Yeah.
And that work will be underway, which is why he's giving kind of an update of where he was last year to this year.
Okay.
And next year, you may see that. So, while I didn't directly answer your question, that's the plan.
Okay.
Pat?
Who decides that they're going to retake? I mean, the student or the student and the parent? How do
Beautiful.
they-
So why don't you say what you're doing now, and then what you're contemplating
Sure.
about strengthening the parent connection, because Pat's very astute in that question.
So I think Mark, who's a practitioner of the redo retake policy, can explain how the policy works and give you an indication of how many of his students take advantage of it.
So I've been doing retake for a really long time, and I think it's great that it's become a school-wide policy now. The policy that we have in place is that there are some requirements that every teacher is bound to. Within that, though, teachers can expand the policy a little bit to meet the needs of their students or whatever it is that they're teaching. Any student who receives a grade of lower than 75 on an assessment or on an assignment that's attached to a standard has the opportunity to redo, revise, retake that assignment, whatever it may be. The program we have set up is that the teacher hands back the assessment. The student has an opportunity to decide on their own with their parents if they want to take advantage of the opportunity that's been put in front of them. Parents are notified via PowerSchool. That's the minimum requirement. So there's a component, I don't know how familiar you guys are with PowerSchool, but there's that score inspector where you can put notes on everything. So within there, it would say, you know, so-and-so has an opportunity to retake this, eligible to retake within, and then there would be a time frame. Within that time frame, the student and the teacher would get together. They would discuss a remediation plan. There's a document that teachers can use that kind of guides what a student needs to do to improve their learning. It might require extra help sessions. It may require doing assignments that they didn't do the first time around. And then within an agreed upon time frame, they complete the retake. After completing the retake, in the past I used to average the scores together. I stopped doing that a couple of years ago. Their score becomes the higher of the two scores, the score that really demonstrates what they're actually capable of doing. And I think that's
Yeah, let me read you two. Let me read you three notes that were in PowerSchool. I randomly went in today. One was may be completed and or revised for up to full credit by watching support video posted in Google Classroom. Please see teacher to create a plan. The next was original score 58%. I worked with your son and gave him opportunity to correct and revise verbally. His score after revision was 78%. So throughout Power School, I do random checks, and there's a lot of communication from the teacher directly to the parent. There's not right now a requirement to get things signed, and that's sort of the next step, is to try to force the issue a little more. But I would say, what do you think percentage-wise of your students taking advantage?
It's pretty high for me. It kind of always has been. There might be a couple of kids who choose not to. But what happens is if you have a kid who is consistently not meeting what our expectations are, and they're not taking advantage of the retake and we haven't heard from the parents, then it's our turn to step it up and move to the next level. Have the parents come in, maybe even bring the kid to stat, depending on the severity of the situation.
So I wanted just to report out some of the data from the new read policy. Our D's and F's have dropped by 38%, specifically our D's by 40%, and our F's by 24%, while at the same time, our MAP scores and our SPEC scores are increasing or having more success in those areas. So I can honestly say that we're not lowering our standard and not giving out less F's and D's because of some kind of lowering of standard. It's really because kids are having the opportunity to redo and retake, and it therefore brings up their averages. I did a brief survey of 30 students. All of them said they were in favor of it. One said she felt badly because she took advantage of it on one occasion because her parents have overprogrammed her. So she felt really bad, but I said, that's okay, still want you to do it. So the students are very happy with it. I was in a meeting today where a parent was very happy that their student was able to take a redo and a retake. So I think the majority of students, parents, and teachers favor it. And what's really important is our message is that we want more students to achieve, and we're going to give you more opportunities to achieve. So far it's working really well.
I was reading my son's redo retake message just now.
Great.
Just so you know.
Was it a good message generally? Did it give you a lot of information that you needed to turn to him and say, hey, go retake that?
Yes, but he chose not to do it, unfortunately.
So that is, in a sense, our next discussion is that something we bring to the realm of discipline or not? We don't know yet. We're still kind of playing around with the first year. We've had some really good results, and now the next year is always fine-tuning. Yes?
Just a little more specificity on this. Do they retake the exact same assessment? Do they take what they just got wrong? Do they get new questions? How does this
Can I
work?
talk to that?
Yeah, sure.
So it's not the exact same test. It's the exact same content or skill.
Sure.
But so, and I tell my kids this, like, don't go home and study that number 1 was true
Exactly.
and number 4 was A, because that's not going to get you anywhere. It's a different version of the same assessment. What I've started doing this year is that if a kid has demonstrated mastery on a concept that I'm teaching in my social studies class, but there's something else on the quiz that they didn't do so well on, then I've chunked out my quizzes. They can retake them by section. So, if there's one particular skill or concept that they really struggled with, instead of having them do the whole thing over again and re-demonstrate that they already know it, which could be frustrating for a kid and not a great use of time for anybody, right? So, this year I've moved towards, where you can, I've taken it down to the question sometimes.
All right, I appreciate that. That's a lot of work to come up with a question bank that is flexible enough to put questions in and out, and hopefully you have a computer program that helps you do that and that you're not doing it by hand, because that's a lot of work, so thank you. I
Thank you
think
for
that's
that.
really, really
Thank you.
good.
And going along with your question, while I was doing some research in the summer for this policy, the ACT tests, which is similar to that, they now allow you to take sections that you did poorly on, so
Great.
which is really interesting. That was never something you could do before. For next year, obviously tweaking and refining redo retake, but also we started yesterday actually to create a prepared student rubric, and so in the future, probably next year, mid-year, we'll be piloting a report card that has basically 2 lanes. One lane is mastery of content, the other lane is work ethic, and it'll clearly be able to tell a parent and a student how they're doing in both those lanes. So that's going to take a lot of very intricate work, especially designing that report card, getting Power School to tell and do what we want it to do. But we're on our way. We started all the fundamental work on the prepared student rubric, and we're excited to get that last component in place next year. Okay. Any other questions about mastery learning or? Okay. So the other pretty big initiative we worked on was our PBIS Pride behavioral system, and I'm going to hand this over to Tracy and allow her to introduce this to you.
Thank you. So we are in our second year. We're about a year and a half into our journey through PBIS, and this all for us started as an initiative around school climate, because the reality is that if school is not safe and comfortable for everyone, none of the learning that we just talked about is going to happen. So we recognized through staff surveys and student surveys that we had some work to do around school climate, and we did some research about what would be a good framework for us to do that work, and we've been working with a consultant to implement a PBIS model. So our entire first year last year was around the foundation, getting our committee, of which Audrey is a part, and she's going to be speaking a little bit tonight, getting us all on the same page. I'm going to start with the third bullet up. So PBIS is a program that is really about prevention and being proactive, and it's about expectations. So our first big work was about what are the expectations. I think we talked about this the last time we were here. What are the expectations that we all as staff agree are important for all kids in all learning, in all places within our building? So we spent a lot of time defining those expectations in every area throughout our building.
That's in your
that's
handbook
in your
too.
handbook as well. I think Jim marked the cover for you. So by setting the expectations, we then spent some time teaching them, and the second bullet talks about that. So PBIS recognizes that students need to be taught the right way to behave in each of these areas. And you might think that they don't, and that they should know how to behave in the bathroom, and Audrey will talk about that, but they do not, especially when they're 12 years old and with their friends, and they have phones, and all kinds of things can happen in the bathroom that are not appropriate. So we spent we spent a lot of time developing these expectations. The entire year last year was spent on developing expectations before any students saw any of this. This year we are in year one of our implementation, and so that's considered kind of our tier one, getting everybody, all kids on the same page in terms of knowing what to expect, what we expect in every place, in every area of our building. I'm going to turn it over to Audrey to kind of go into a little bit more depth about our time
Point
frame.
out the picture. So
Yeah, go
the
for it.
the photo is Audrey teaching bathroom expectations.
Teach you how to use a bathroom.
And I saw this lesson firsthand, and it was kind of incredible. She had two different bathrooms. One was trashed with all sorts of problems, and the other one was the model bathroom. And I'm going to tell you, those kids went right along with that lesson, and they listened to every word. And I left there and said, wow, you know, you really do have to teach kids how to use the bathroom properly. I was really kind of shocked and surprised. So, love it.
So, like Tracy said, it's a process. So last year, a lot of it was really just kind of planning how we wanted to approach this, you know, what the best use for everything in our school would be, and a lot of brainstorming, you know, a lot of trying to figure out how are we all gonna buy into this, how are we going to get the students to buy into it, how are we going to get the staff to buy into it, and really just trying to figure out how, not only buy-in, but we genuinely believe this can work really well, and so trying to develop the lessons and obviously all the signage and the expectations. That was the biggest part. Like Tracy said, the purpose was to really give those clear expectations to every student and faculty member in our school, what behaviors we want, whether it's in our classrooms, in the hallway, in the bathroom, in the cafeteria. And that was, a lot of the work went into creating those matrices, the documents, and then teaching it. So that the first 2 days of school, we altered our schedule, and we taught lessons about how how to behave in school. You know, I taught the bathroom one, someone was teaching on the bus. So not only are they they're not sitting there listening to a lecture on how to use the bus, how to use the bathroom, but in the bathroom they all practiced, not actually going to the bathroom, but what you would do, flushing the toilet, throwing your garbage away, signing back into your classroom, and on the bus, you know, how you do it the right way. Which seems kind of silly, and a lot of people thought, why would we teach that? But there's a lot of clarity in that, and the students knew exactly by day 3 what was expected of them. That also helped us to really be able to document when they weren't doing what they now know they need to do. But also the PBIS, the PB is the positive behavior. We really wanted to focus on the positives, and bring light to what everyone was doing so well in our school. And that was a mindset shift as well for the faculty. Because like Tracy said, you know, climate wasn't wonderful, and it allowed us to pause and take a step back and really recognize and notice how much
Good.
Yeah, how much good.
Kids generally are pretty good.
That the kids are good, and we really work in a wonderful place. And so part of this program has been reinforcing those positive behaviors. So we put together what we call pride cards, and anytime we catch a student doing what they're supposed to be doing, we can give them a pride card for that. And that's pride in your learning, pride in your behavior, pride in your community. And so we give these pride cards out, and every week there's a raffle. They can put their cards in the raffle, and they can win things like making a smoothie at lunch. They can win eating at the picnic tables in the foyer. There's a lot of fun kind of community building prizes that they can win as well. And it becomes really exciting. If you walk by the halls during homeroom, a lot of the homerooms are getting excited when, you know, someone's pulling out the winners on the morning announcements. Everyone gets all excited. Is it gonna be us? They cheer for each other. So that's been a big part of it. But even more important, I think, has been the new documentation system. Prior to this, we haven't had a system of documenting what's going on in each individual classroom. And if I'm dealing with a student on my own, you know, using those supports that I might use in the classroom, asking a student to move their seat, be in a assigned seat, having a conversation with that kid in the hallway because of a behavior, writing an email home, none of those things were documented together. And so if I was doing those things, and Mark was doing those things, and another teacher was doing those things, we didn't know. And this new system allows us to put all of that data together. And it kind of alerts Tracy when the same student is having all these kind of minor, low-level behaviors in different areas. And that has helped us to really recognize the students that need additional supports. And that's kind of our next steps for next year.
The other 2 letters, and she talked about positive behavioral intervention and support. So the work that we're doing right now is, what do we now really do? We all have tools and strategies and things that we've done in the past, but what are the best practices around helping kids that are repeat offenders with either low-level behaviors or behaviors that are starting to escalate? So, you know, in the pyramid of academic support, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, when a kid is struggling, you kind of move them up and you intensify the interventions and the supports. The same is true on the behavioral side. And so what we're working on now, we've had some PD and some release time with our committee to really look at what is our process for flagging kids and for intervening with the most appropriate intervention, so that we can kind of nip that behavior before it really interferes either with their learning or the learning of other people. So that's where we are literally right now. We just met like last week on that process, and we're continuing to move forward. So our successes thus far, we in general have seen a significant reduction, as you know, in some of our major discipline infractions. I think when Audrey was talking about the time spent on the first 2 days of school, we noticed an immediate difference in our entire school climate. Just the hallways, the larger spaces when all the kids are together were, you know, it's a noticeable difference this year in terms of kind of calmness and orderly. And again, not that it was out of control and totally crazy, but you know, it can be a busy place with 600 kids moving at the same time. So there's definitely a difference and kind of a respect that everyone is showing for the environment that they share with each other. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, we took another school climate survey with our teachers, and everything that was in the 50-60 range for things like has faith in the discipline system, feels that we clearly communicate behavioral expectations, that all went up to the 80 and 90%. So we're really happy with the feelings that teachers have in the school about our behavioral system. Our in-school, out-of-school, as of January 1st, was down 40%, so we're really happy about that. And we're really happy that we sort of cleaned the halls up visually, and really those types of signs, they're not, they're not unattractive, they're framed nicely. We had a grant that paid for all of that, and I think it makes it really clear and clean to the students what's expected, and it's just a quieter place with more learning going on. So I think that's ultimately the goal. Marcia?
Quick question about the survey. Was that the survey that you did at the end of last year?
So we took about 5 of those questions and 5 of our own, and redid the 5 that were on last year's survey, and 5 new ones that were more specific to this program. And all of the areas went from
When
the,
did you do that?
we did it about
January.
a month and a half ago.
Yeah, right
Can
Yeah.
we see the results of that survey?
Sure, I can bring it to you next time.
And what was the
Absolutely.
participation rate?
It was pretty high.
The participation rate
I could
is
tell you,
high.
I could tell you right now some of it. We had 59 teachers participate. That was out of roughly about 70, and that was up from 24 the previous year.
Yeah, that's why I was
Yes.
worried. That's why I'm
Um,
looking at the validity of the whole thing.
So the 4 that really stick out, CLMS is a common professional educational environment. That moved from 60% to 92%. There is a clear vision of this for the school's students in the area of behavioral expectations. That moved from 40 to 98%. The emotional well-being of students is emphasized at our school. That went from 75 to 96%. This is what I'm really happy about, most happy about. Order and discipline are consistently maintained. That went from 36% to 94%.
Was it anonymous?
It's all anonymous. And the last one,
If you could share the results with them.
yeah, I could just copy this and get it to you. The school's efforts in the area of behavioral expectations and supports have improved the school environment. That was 100% favorable. So, I'm pretty happy with it.
Glad to hear that.
Jim, your
Sure.
school got a lot of accolades last year for the improvements it's made. How much do you attribute this program to those successes?
So we actually didn't have this program in place till this past fall. So the accolades you're talking about was the previous spring's testing that brought the state of Connecticut Performance Department to see us. So I think that we will have just as strong or stronger testing this spring, because we've now adjusted another piece of the machine to be even calmer. And I think more students are on task than ever before. So, we adjusted a teaching methodology and resources, and now we're fine-tuning the school climate. And, you gotta remember, we're dealing with middle schoolers. So anytime we can improve 1 or 2 things, you can get really great results. But if you fail in those 1 or 2 things, you can get miserable failures. So,
In terms of the
Sounds
piece
thanks.
of the discipline, you talked about the student's behavior in one class then translating to another class to see. How is that tracked? Explain to me how you do that.
So,
Well, there's kind of 2 pieces to it. So teachers have a documentation form that's an electronic, rather than a referral system that we used to use, we recreated a form. So I would document whether it was a minor behavior, meaning a teacher, I dealt with it in my classroom on my own. And I send it in electronically, and Tracy's secretary, Martha, plugs it into a system that's called Swiss, which is part of this PBIS program. And so all of that gets tracked into Swiss. And I would do the same thing if it was a major behavior, right? So if it was something that I wasn't going to deal with in my classroom, maybe I had to remove the kid from my classroom, and it became an issue that Jim or Tracy needed to deal with at a different level of discipline or intervention. It still gets documented the same way. I would still send it in with all the information that I collected from the behavior, and then it goes to Tracy, and you know more about the Swiss program.
yeah, so then the only difference would be I complete the actions taken part. So whatever actions I take or Jim might take, then gets filled in. So then it's just, it's a simple database in terms of you can click on a kid and look at what their pattern of behavior is. So every time one of those comes in, we kind of check, is this the first one, is this the second one, is this the third one? And then if it's elevating, then we put it in the lane where we're gonna look at that kid a little closer.
Does it go back to the team?
Either, if I issue consequences, yeah, it goes back to, so they know what the actions are.
So, the expectations matrix that you have with the signs and all of that, you said you taught that in the beginning of the school year. After the first 2 days of school that you've taught this, how frequently or how often are you teaching these same
That's a
skills?
great
Good question, I meant to
Yep.
say that. We retaught again in December, the whole school kind of changed the schedule for a morning so that we would have an extended homeroom and kind of retaught most of the things on there, highlighting some of the items
How much
that
time?
I think we spent an
We spent 30
additional
minutes.
half hour.
We extended homeroom for 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then we're doing that again next week or in
Next
a week
week.
and a half.
2 weeks.
Yep.
The start of the next
So you're
trimester.
doing it a marking period, a semester, that sort of thing, a half hour
So
semester?
not to the extent that those first lessons were with the getting on the bus and going into the bathroom, it's more of a small group, going through kind of a prepared presentation so that everybody's getting the same message. And, you know, right now we're looking at what are the behaviors we really wanna focus on right now going into the third trimester. What are we seeing a lot of? Where do we need to reset?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The data we can pull out of Swiss is really amazing. Craig and I had our monthly principal meeting with Mr. Sachs. Was that this week? It seems forever.
That was 2 days ago.
2 days ago. And,
been a lot.
and Jim was sharing us with data that the team over there, the PBIS steering team, can break down data by time of day. Like, so where are the spikes in time of day? Month, week, location, I think is pretty powerful. So they can, part of that work moving forward is, okay, we know we have a problem at 12:17 in the hallway from the cafeteria back to the classrooms. What are we gonna do about that? And that's, I know, part of your work moving forward.
It
so.
also creates nice visuals for kids, so I've used some of the visuals when I've been meeting with kids to show, it kind of graphs their behavior, so they can see where their spikes are, or where their pattern, like, is there a certain behavior, is there a certain location that they're struggling with, and I've seen kids kind of go like, oh, that kind of is a problem for me. So it's been helpful in the intervention sense.
Let me touch on that for a second. So last spring, we met with every student in LA and math and went over their standardized testing performance over a few years. And we saw a big jump. So we're thinking that was a piece of it too, as they became more aware of themselves and their profile. And we can almost replicate that in the area of behavior by showing certain students, this is your record of behavior in a very visual way, and say, you know, we all need to fix this, and you need to be on board, and you need to see it. So I think a lot more awareness sort of the pattern they're creating will help us with that. Yes?
Do you look at it the other way possibly to see, be making all the referrals, whether they're substitutes or teachers
Right,
or aides and
So that's not really a year one thing. So honestly, year one is to get the system down, the recording system, to figure it all out. In year two, we would probably start looking more at adult actions. But I think in year one, we're trying to sort of figure out this whole system. And we're not, honestly, I don't think we have an ideal number for a teacher yet, so.
We still really are trying to get everyone consistent, right? We need that consistency and fidelity to be able to then compare, you know, the data that we're
It's a
putting
great
in
question,
there.
though.
So,
Are the aides and the paras making referrals or these discipline things as well?
Yeah,
All right.
everyone can make a
Any
referral.
adult who works with a kid.
Anyone.
Is there anything in place for the teachers as far as verbal de-escalation or some sort of a toolbox to, if they see a child that's escalating or getting up there, is there any kind of training or something that, like we do handle with CARE in my school system, and I train in verbal de-escalation techniques before it reaches the, boy, I gotta make this big referral now. Just
So-
thinking from a classroom
So we
perspective.
don't, so I'll say that we don't have a lot of verbal escalations, probably per week, 1, maybe 2, and most of the time, the teachers have been very much familiarized with the history of that student, so they know what supports myself, Tracy, or another support person. Pick up the phone, we're right there. So we have all those techniques down pretty well in terms of de-escalation. So do all the social workers, psychologists, school counselors, even our SRO. We have not specifically trained teachers for that, but that's an interesting idea. Okay.
I know a great trainer.
You know, a great trainer, great.
Thank you.
Any
Thanks so
questions?
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you guys.
appreciate your work.
Thank you, nice job.
Continue with the superintendent's report. Well, it seems to be Clark Lane night here. We thank them for the artwork both in the room and the hallway. Something I wanted to bring to the board's attention and also families who may be watching the board meeting, because these are streamed, is something that's been kind of under the radar. I had the opportunity to attend a meeting about it a couple weeks ago. Is it was passed last legislative session that community college tuition is now free in the state of Connecticut. I'm not sure all families are aware of that, and I'm just gonna go through, it's called the Pledge to Advance Connecticut Pact, that there is no cost for community college for any student in the state of Connecticut. There are no income limitations, so if you come from an extremely wealthy family or a family with high need, community college is free. Requirements: you have to apply for you have to fill out a FAFSA application. That's the financial aid application for higher education, and you have to accept that money first. Once you've exhausted the FAFSA, community college in the state of Connecticut is free. And the only other requirements is you have to be a high school graduate. You have to be a first-time enrollee in the community college system. You have to take 12 credits, which is kind of the bare minimum to be a full-time matriculated student. You have to be working towards a degree or completion of a program. You just can't take 4 random courses and say, well, scuba diving looks cool, and this looks cool, and so you have to be in a program working towards a degree, and remain in good academic standing. Other than that, if you meet those bare minimum requirements, our students, our Connecticut residents, will be able to go to community college for free, which, when you begin to do the math in terms of higher education, it's tens of thousands of dollars to families. The thing I was really pleased to hear about is, you might recall several years ago that they passed legislation that community college credits now are fully matriculated into UConn and the 4 state universities. The Board of Regents, which governs community colleges, have now cut deals with universities such as Quinnipiac. So it's really progressing. And as information becomes available, we're going to certainly pull it out, put it out to our families. The application deadline for the fall is July 15th, which is fairly late into the summer, which I think is a really positive thing for families. So it's pretty impactful. One other fact out of this meeting was that Connecticut has the highest student loan debt of any state in the country, at over $30,000 per student. So the fact that somebody can go to community college for up to 3 years, it's a 3-year limitation, for free, it's a staggering development in higher ed in Connecticut. So I wanted to make sure I shared that with the board. As you might recall from Leah O'Connor's presentation in the fall, about 25%, approaching 30% of our students attend community college, and the fact that they're going to be able to go there for free is a great thing. More on that as it develops. A few other highlights from the district. Oswegatchie had a family science night early in February, manned by Oswegatchie staff and Waterford High students. It was held in conjunction with their invention convention. 4th grade at Oswegatchie continues to work with the Flock Theater on their Artists in Residence program. And across all 3 elementary schools, pre-K and K teachers are beginning some professional development on executive function and purposeful play, which you will hear about in next month's Board of Ed presentation from the Oswegatchie team. Quaker Hill recently enjoyed a STEM day and has been doing a lot of work this week around STEM, and I'm just going to kind of turn it over to Chris Discordia and Craig Powers to talk about that.
Yeah, so just as far as background, we receive an entitlement grant through the Title funds, the Every Student Success Act, and one is called Title IV, which is really to have student support and kind of enrichment grant. So it allows to promote students' access to well-rounded education, improve academic outcomes. Waterford, this is the third year we've received this grant. Waterford receives $21,220. So we have been doing after-school programs for the past 2 years, but Chris will kind of explain how the elementaries have focused much more on a science enhancement, and what you're going to hear from Chris will be replicated at each of the other schools in the near to come. So, Mr. Discordia?
So Craig and I went to a workshop a couple years ago, and EastCon has this really cool, it's like a big mobile lab. There's a picture of it right there. And so it's got all the cool science tools and things we don't normally have in elementary school. Back then it was a little out of our price range, so over the last couple of years we talked about using grant money to fund it for the 3 elementary schools. So the way it works is they actually staff it with a certified science teacher. And she comes and works with us beforehand to develop the lessons. So Janelle's here, Janelle Ray helped to do that, and a couple of our other teachers work together to figure out how to best use the lab in the time we have it. It comes for a full week. The first day is teacher training, so all the teachers go in the lab, they see the tools, they learn what we're going to be doing. And then the next couple of days, all the classes come through and actually do the science labs together. So you'll see some of the kids working on this, a pollination group right there. They love putting on their little scientist goggles and getting dirty in there. And the good thing about it is all the mess stays inside the lab. So the handheld microscopes were really cool. They're LED light, and they're really kid friendly for elementary students. Really, they just stick it on the table and they stick their eye against it. They were doing an analysis right there of feathers and trying to figure out what feathers went to what animal. So we have a couple different rotations going on. We're in the middle of it right now. The lessons tomorrow and the 5th grade ones, I don't know, Janelle, if you want to talk about that at all, put you on the spot. But.
That's okay. So 5th grade is doing a problem solving technique, and the students are going to have a crime investigation to solve and figure out. So they'll be looking at hair products, they'll be looking at footprints, tracks, fingerprinting. So they'll be really deep into solving the crime.
So that exposure to forensics is something that usually students get an opportunity at high school. Here it's at 5th grade is the first blush.
So kudos to our teachers for really helping to develop these lessons. And then each of the schools will have an opportunity. So all the kids across the district will have an opportunity to do this. We had kids in K and 1 had an opportunity to go through and tour the lab, so they got to see, and they do like little activities, but really we put the bulk of the time towards hands-on lessons for grades 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we hope to do that kind of continue on down the road here. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. A couple other highlights for the board around the district. Great Neck hosted their annual kindness assembly on February 14th. Craig, myself, Kathy Malone had the opportunity to be a part of that. Really was an uplifting day for sure. And Great Neck 5th graders just celebrated their Youth Promise promotion, our version of DARE. Really a great program. Clark Lane, 15 members of the Clark Lane Student Council recently attended the Connecticut Association of Schools Middle School Student Leadership Conference at Trinity College. And they learned about building a climate of acceptance, communication, and making a difference, along with themes of mindfulness, rising to the occasion, and social media safety. So a great event. And 2 Clark Lane students recently presented at the Elementary Leadership Conference, and our students presented on practicing effective communication strategies. So a lot of great things going on. High school had their Minding Your Mind assembly. I spoke about that in January, that was upcoming, that occurred with guest speaker Jordan Burnham, and was really an impactful event. Mr. Hauser, I don't know if you want to share a few words about Minding Your Mind.
Yes, as Tom mentioned, it really had an impact on the students, and very often when you bring a speaker in, there'll be an impact for a few days, but then that memory starts to fade. So what we did to make sure that that wasn't going to happen and that this was reinforced for kids was that Assistant Principal Allison Mosier came up with, based on the questions kids were asking, a lot of information to share in advisory the next week about how to seek help or how to seek help for a friend or a family member, because those were the questions kids were asking, and about the resources we have available at the high school to access. And then after that, she worked with our school psychology intern and took the remaining questions, and there were a lot that kids submitted, and took up about a page and a half of the next issue of our student newspaper with detailed answers and suggestions for seeking help for a variety of different topics that had come up that the kids had brought up in it. So it's really something, we do feel that the mental health of our kids is, you know, absolutely the utmost important, and we've been reinforcing that message since then.
Thank you. Waterford High just hosted their midwinter 8th grade parent night for incoming freshmen and attended by almost 100 parents, which is a great turnout. And last but not least, on school news is a Waterford High School special education teacher, Colleen Weinberg, was recently named the Unified Sports Coach of the Year for the state of Connecticut, so a great honor. And then finally, I did this last year, just a brief legislative update on what's going on up at the Capitol as far as education legislation. We are in the midst of a short session. What that means is no budget deliberations. It's typically traditionally been a quieter season. I would not say that pattern has continued. I just wanted to share brief snippets of proposed legislation. So, you know, it's only proposed at this point. But it would add magnet charter schools and the Connecticut Technical High School System into ECS funding. That's the grant that the state gives each town for education. The reason I mention that is I don't think the pot of money will get larger, but it conceivably could be split amongst more entities. So I think about that. As you might recall, Waterford's ECS allocation over the years has been negatively impacted. On the subject of ECS, there is a bill that would link town requirements around meeting affordable housing thresholds to whether or not you would receive state funding. Again, this is only proposed legislation, but you can see some you know, themes there. There's a bill out there that would require the State Department of Education to do a study around school start times. You're probably saying, what is that about? It's really around the research of starting high school later. So the State Department, this bill, if passed, would require the State Department of Ed to do a comprehensive study on that. And those are just a couple of brief highlights from the legislature, and I'll keep you up to date as things transpire. Unless there's any questions for me, that concludes the superintendent's report.
Oh, Tom, that study on start time for, you know, how, you know, it's bad for high school students to start early. Isn't that a very dated study?
I think that buzz started years ago. I know that I know there have been more recent studies that continue to support that view. There have been a couple of school districts in Connecticut that have gone that route. Most recently that comes to mind is Wilton Public Schools here in Connecticut and Guilford Public Schools. What becomes the challenge is really about if all your other partner high schools that you have different relationships with, i.e. whether it be sports or after school activities, aren't doing it also, that becomes challenging. The bigger nugget is really around transportation.
Yeah, what I read though is, it's in the journal, I should clip these things out, but basically that study was years ago, and it had subsequent studies showed that it wasn't the case.
That may be, I'm not well versed on this, you know, amongst the most recent studies, the ones that I'm familiar, like as you said, go back a ways, but it will be interesting to see what comes of that. I'm not sure it has a lot of legs because the state couldn't even stick to the uniform school calendar, which is just the number of days per year, and so to legislate, your school has to start at a certain time. sure. I'm not overly optimistic that would pass. I have nothing else.
Okay, thank you. Committee and other reports, I guess, you wanna, Joy, you do policy? Okay.
I am.
Have at it.
Okay. The policy committee will be moving 5 policies to the board. Non-discrimination for the community, non-discrimination for personnel certified and non-certified, non-discrimination for students, smoke-free environment, and alcohol, tobacco, and drug-free workplace. Of those 5, we asked for clarification on 2 that will be added. For non-discrimination on students, there will be further clarification of what genetic information means. That was one of the added features to that policy. And for alcohol, tobacco, and drug-free workplace, we requested clarity on what is considered school property as it relates to contracted services. And we asked for some verbiage included concerning vaping, those types of things in the language. So that will be coming to the board soon.
Any questions on that? Greg, you wanna
Sure.
talk about finance?
Finance, interesting meeting. The charge that the administration brought to the meeting was, if we wanted to cut the budget by 1%, what would we do? So the threshold question for the committee was, do we want to cut the budget at all? And it was a narrow vote, 3-2. Yes, let's consider that. The thought on the part of the nays was, we don't want to cut the budget at this level. If we have to cut the budget, okay, we'll look at some things, but, so that's the minority view, and the majority view, and again, it was very narrow, 3-2. There are some things that we should cut. And so, we asked for public comment before we began the deliberations. There was none. So then we went through each of the suggested line items that the administration had suggested that would bring about a reduction in the budget. And we talked about those, and then we asked if anyone on the committee had any other suggestions, and there were none. So let me kind of go through what we looked at. And these were the administration's proposals. School to career coordinator. Eliminate that position at a savings of $25,836. The committee didn't vote to recommend that to the board. Elimination of the in-school suspension monitor at the middle school. The committee didn't vote to recommend that to the board. That would have been a savings of $37,564. It would have meant some reassignment of teacher duties. Bus lot location, a savings of $30,000. We really had no choice, as the town has told us we've got to do that, so we voted in favor of that. Magnet busing, we're not required to do this. A savings of $25,504. The committee voted to do that. Elimination of the elementary talented and gifted program. The committee did not want to recommend that to the board. That would have been a savings of $73,546. Our laptops are on a 6-year cycle. If we extended that 1 year, that would be a savings of $56,700. The committee thought that was a good idea. Again, a narrow vote, 3-2, to recommend that to the board. Eliminate a certified math teacher and math coaching position at the high school, a savings of $73,546. Committee could not vote in favor of that. A certified teacher at the high school in English and literacy coaching, Similar savings, the committee did not vote in favor of that. Cut 2, K through 8 math coaches. Committee talked about that and decided that one coach, we could do that, but we didn't want to cut 2 coaches. Again, it was a close vote, 3-2. So that's a savings. Without my glasses,
Great.
looks like 73,546, is that correct?
Yes.
Well, they're gonna be different, so that's all right. I won't have any excuses then either,
Fair enough.
so. At the elementary level, to cut, K through 8, that is, a literacy coach. Committee did not want to recommend that to the board. If we had done some of the cuts that had been proposed, we would have had increased unemployment exposure up to over $84,000. The way it worked out, what we are recommending to the board, there's no reductions in staff, so there's no increase in unemployment exposure. A strange coincidence, one wonders. An increase in the professional development line. If we were going to eliminate coaches, the thought some had expressed was that we needed to increase professional development. In light of the small cut in coaches, that's not necessary, so we don't have to worry about a $30,000 increase there. The administration believes, and the committee accepted that by a narrow vote, that we're taking a new hard line in our negotiations, and that we should increase our legal budget by $50,000, and the committee voted to recommend that to the board. Supplies and equipment, there was a suggestion or recommendation that we could cut $11,600 or so from the budget. We thought that was nitpicking and not worth it. The committee rejected that. Increase in travel, a $500 increase, not really applicable in terms of what the committee was recommending, so they rejected that. Bottom line, the committee is suggesting to the board and recommending to the board that we could cut $135,750 from the budget request along the lines that I just suggested.
Okay, thank you. And there is no community use of schools, talked about, so, as far as liaisons go, Chris, did you have anything for Atlantic?
To a language schools.
Okay. Atlantic Broadband, we didn't have a meeting, we meet the 18th of next month, was there any, youth services?
Well, that moved. They canceled this one, so there's one later in March.
Did I miss any? And as far as liaisons from the boards, I don't think we have any. So, move on to new business. First item is capital request. Joe, you wanna?
Right, so at the start of the budget process, we had brought before you guys a request for $637,000, which was approved and then forwarded on to the first selectman. First selectman was kind of aiming for a specific range of right around 400,000, so ultimately that's what he approved. What the decisions that were made would have cut the funding of the turf field from $125,000 down to $75,000. If you recall, we're trying to set aside about $1 million every decade just for the replacement of the turf fields. The first one to be replaced will obviously be the football, and then 15 years from now or 20 years from now it'll be the softball. Also eliminated was the Quaker Hill heat pump replacement. We requested $22,000 per year for the foreseeable future. Quaker Hill has a unique solution. It's an older chemical that's in it. I don't know if it's here, but they're cost prohibitive to fix, easier to replace when they break. The bus lot, so obviously we're staying here, but we have to build a building. So last year we had requested $75,000, this year we had requested $75,000. We have received that funding, so we'll start looking at plans to put a building across the street. School security for $50,000, this is, this was supported by the first selectman, not necessarily what it was about. CLMS HVAC, we had requested $25,000. that has been eliminated. That $25,000 is essentially to do a study on what it's gonna cost for us to replace all of the HVAC over at Park Lane. If you recall last year, we brought in natural gas. At some point in the next decade, you're gonna have to replace the cooling towers that are over there. When you do that, it makes sense to replace the entire system. IT learning boards, this is year number 4 out of 5, so this is the last elementary school. First selectman forwarded on the $200,000 for that. IT security DVR cameras, this is for the replacement of the hardware that's there. This is not the individual cameras, this is the entire system and DVRs. The first selectman has asked us to push that out another year. And the IT TV studio systems, that has also been pushed out for a couple of years. So, at the end of the day, we still have good money to continue moving forward from a technological standpoint. And it's a responsible request and approval.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions on that? Okay, thank you, Joe. Next, we mentioned to Tom that we'd like to look at some sort of recognition program for the students, so go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, previously the board had said that, board may wanna look at, as a way to, we have many outstanding students, as a way to recognize them at board meetings. So the, chair and I, worked on a proposed board recognition program, and it's not really an action item per se, but it's certainly there for the board to review and comment.
I read it, I think it's great, I think we should institute it, and I like it.
Nice job.
Okay, excellent. So that's something we could put on the next meeting agenda, move forward with it.
Great job.
Plan to have some students, before you, next month, and, you know, if you look at the description for the public and the audience, it's sometimes the under the radar students that are doing great things that don't always get the recognition. Certainly we have, you know, many students who receive a lot of accolades, whether it be in the arts or performing arts or graphic arts or certainly athletics, and as well as outstanding academic achievements. But we have, you know, just a lot of really great young people who don't always get the recognition that he or she deserves. So it's gonna be a way for the board to obviously recognize those outstanding achievements that occur in the district, but also sometimes maybe it's the student who helps another student every single day, and they just do it because they wanna do it, and those sorts of things. So I really look forward to the principals submitting nominations for the board to recognize. And you will have recipients starting next month.
Chris, thanks for kind of being the,
Sports, yay.
the next 3 are all related to policy. Craig, you wanna kinda walk us through these, if you don't mind?
Sure. So, the first is, kinda going along with our continuing realignment of, policy numbers, the student policy, what policies remain, with their old numbers, and we've simplified it with new numbers, so there's not this, decimal points, and you know, very long numbers. So, that would be the first motion. This will almost complete the realignment series of the policy manual. After that, the future work would be at the board level with bylaws.
Would someone like to make that motion, please?
I'd like to move that the Waterford Board of Education approves policy sequence revisions for series 5,000 and 6,000 as proposed.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
I say, you know, that work was almost complete because you recall that under the previous series, 1,000 to 4,000, we missed to readopt some plans. So the next attachment has those 4 policies in with their pre-existing number and what the new number would be. And then below it is two policies that are up for deletion because those are covered in other mandated ways, and it no longer necessitates the need for a policy.
Okay, motion for that, please.
I'd like to move that the Waterford Board of Education approves the policy retention and deletion for series 1,000, 3,000, and 4,000 as proposed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
So next we'll get into the policy review, as Joy had mentioned. There are 3 non-discrimination policies. The danger with doing redundant policies but in different sections is that which information goes in what. So with respect to one of the questions that Joy mentioned the policy committee was asking for, which was really when is, in what policy is genetic information detailed in, it's only in the personnel policy. It's only in the personnel policy because of the GINA Act, which is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. In an overview, really what that is that if a future employer becomes aware of someone's maybe genetic information, what would that mean? It might mean that they have a very autoimmune disease or other ailments that shouldn't preclude them from hiring them. So that's the Non-Discrimination Act. So that's in the personnel policy only because that's where the hiring would come on. So it should not have been in the first draft of the community relations or the students at all. So with that, these policies have been updated and revised to clarify discrimination based upon alienage, citizenship, which is prohibited by law, plus the addition of the genetic information in the personnel policy only. So that would be on those 3 if there's questions or a motion to approve.
Yeah, and since these are our first reading, we can either take action and approve these, or else.
So these would be under a board policy. It allows us that if it's just really simple statutory changes, the board can enact these by approving in one meeting if they so choose. Policies that don't have a direct nexus to statutory changes would require 2 readings. So it's up to the board, but they have the opportunity to approve these at this first reading.
Okay.
Craig, did you go into the information about the vaping and stuff on the?
I was going to get that when we do the next policy.
Okay, because the recommended action.
Oh, it's for all of them?
It is.
Then so sorry, so I will go on. So then we have the smoke-free environment policy. This has been updated, which prohibits smoking on grounds. Previously, the policy only prohibited smoking within indoor facilities. So this policy now extends to sporting events on our fields, in the stands. That would be a smoke-free environment. And we added in this one, I think we said smoke and a vapor product, just to add clarity in that, because technically there's a difference between a cigarette smoke and an e-cigarette emission of vapor. Any question on that one?
So you're saying just grounds, meaning anywhere?
School
So
grounds.
anywhere at all?
If the town owns the property as school property, then it's no smoking anywhere.
And that's legislatively driven, that's not like,
Sure.
we're just creating that rule here.
No, because he was, and just clarifying also that it would mean the stands, under the
lots.
stands,
Yep.
around the,
Yeah.
everything.
So the last policy would be the alcohol, tobacco, drug-free workplace and schools communities. This was revisited to conform with the smoking policy that also prohibited on school-owned property, leased, contracted by the board. The question that Joy mentioned was, what about our buses that we contract with a different vendor? So in asking legal counsel, our current policy on alcohol, tobacco, and drug-free workplace would only apply to employees. However, its provisions to incorporate into bus contracts, no smoking or vaping, could be in bus contracts. So Joe reviewed our bus contract and also talked with our bus vendor. And do you want to just set up?
It excludes nicotine products, which they consider vapes to be a part of. Having said that, in the next contract, we can make it more explicit.
So our current contract prohibits smoking, but when you talk to the bus manager is extending that in practice to electronic cigarettes as well. So in practice, we have that done now, and we will look to just add that clarifying language in a subsequent bus contract. So those are all the policies, if there's any questions.
So First Student is the only transportation contractor we use? We don't use Curtin or anyone else?
We use our own vans, for which they're school-owned, so that this policy would comport with our own vans. As far as if we have to outsource with Curtin, we would have to do the same review.
Contract review, okay, thank you.
That's all, a motion would be in order if you'd like to.
All right, I'll move that the Waterford Board of Education approves policy 1,000, non-discrimination community, policy 4336/4800, non-discrimination, personnel certification and certified and non-certified, policy 5110, non-discrimination students, policy 1165, smoke-free environment, policy 4028/4820, alcohol, tobacco, and drug-free workplace.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? So the next item is the final action on the budget. So we got a couple of things prior to getting to actually nailing down a number. First, Tom has an update on some of the insurance.
Sure, when I first did the first budget workshop on February 6th, we had put in estimations for some of our insurances such as fire, auto, property, liability, and things like that. As of 3 o'clock today, Mr. Mancini received firm rates
Firm
for
rates.
FY '21, so I'll hand it over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, so it basically results in a reduction of $25,788, decent amount. But that's kind of essentially the breakout.
So if you look at budget global, the lower amount is the
Thank you. Next, we need to decide whether we're going to take action on the Finance Committee recommendation of reducing the budget by $135,750 as recommended by the committee.
Motion, the first motion, that the board approve a reduction of $30,000 from the proposed budget. And that would come from the bus lot relocation line item.
Are you making a motion, Greg?
Yes,
Are we gonna do it item by item?
I thought that would be more.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, that was my intention, because we may approve of some and disapprove of others. And what better way to do it than line item by line item?
The recommendation from the committee was
137,
some, or-
right, but my motion is initially to reduce the budget by 30,000, and that's for the bus lot relocation.
I mean, we certainly can do that, I'm not opposed to that, if anyone else is. Okay, so we have a motion, second.
I'm opposed to going line by line because I was going to speak about the overall budget, I guess can we talk about other places the dollars maybe have come from, or is that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I would say that going line by line is going to take up potential time, where if we, had an amount that we could speak about, then it would allow the superintendent and his team to figure out maybe the best way to come up with the loss or the dollars.
I would not be pained if my motion failed for lack of a second.
So I believe the board budget that needs to be approved tonight needs to be each and every line. So if you said, we're gonna approve a budget that's 30,000 less than the budget that was proposed, you can't tell me, oh, go
Right,
figure out a later
right,
date.
right.
that's
Figure out where
it.
you're getting
Like,
that from, right.
The budget that the board
Yeah.
needs to approve tonight has to be delineated across
Correlate
the
with it.
400 lines in the budget. And Mr. Mancini, and that's,
Yeah, that is the intent.
So, since we're talking about it, I seem in my mind to go with Michelle. Although at finance, or whatever we called our last meeting, we talked about these items, if there's more discussion from people on the board who were not at that meeting or who couldn't speak at that meeting, if they seem to think otherwise, then that would lead to conversations, to Michelle's point. So I don't know that going to this paper from the other night makes practical sense. So I agree with Michelle.
Well,
That's why I was asking.
And part of that too is we have a recommendation from the committee that we have to do something about. So we
No.
either accept that or
Well, the re-
reject it, and then certainly there is more discussion that could be had,
Well,
you know.
I think that we should have discussion before we get to motion. That's what I think.
The charge we gave our superintendent 2 weeks ago, though, was to come back and show us what would 1% cut in the budget look like. And that's what he and his administrative team have done. So they looked at everything, and this is what they came up with. So I would feel uncomfortable going off the tracks and looking for something else. If I could find something, I would have mentioned it 2 weeks ago.
And that's kind of how I felt, as if that discussion probably should have been had at that committee meeting, and if there was anything additional, it probably should have been brought to that meeting.
Yeah, we were
some way or
asked,
another.
right, where do we want them to
Right.
cut?
Mhm. So
And
we
we
were-
didn't give them any
We were
option.
presented with a 1%
This is what we got.
option and said,
Mhm.
here's what would be affected,
Yes.
or here's an option to it, so I think,
But it was just a directive, to the board to see what that 1% looked like.
yeah.
We never voted on whether the majority of people wanted 1% or not. And maybe we should have that discussion first. It seems like we're ready to throw out numbers here, and there are a lot of people, I think, that feel that we gave a directive to our administration to do the best for our students in Waterford. And he and his administration has always presented a budget that is pretty austere, in my opinion. And also, if we did have leftovers, it always went back to the town. But you have the money up front to at least do with what you can. And I understand that there is a real push out there to get a 0% increase in town budgets all over the place. The Board of Education should take a stand and say, we're not about numbers, we're about education. And if this is what it takes to put a good education on the table for our students, then this is what we're behind. And that's the way I feel about it.
I go back to the line items. If we're gonna go line item by line item, then so be it. And that's what makes for worthy conversation. But people who were not at the last meeting who sit at this table, they didn't have a chance. So let's just pick a name. Joy, you're not on the finance committee.
Correct.
So you weren't there to say, maybe you were there, I don't know if you were there. Either way, you didn't sit at the table, so if you have some indifference to something, you didn't have an opportunity to speak to it since the last time that we spoke. And maybe my thoughts that I have learned things different from the other night to today, because it's such a moving target. So whatever we're gonna do, if we're gonna go line item by line item, so be it, or if we're just gonna talk about what we talked about the other night, so be it. But we have to have some conversation about it, in my mind. That's what I think. And I understand that you have an opinion, Marcia, and you feel very strongly about some things, but just as you have an opinion, I have an opinion.
And you have a right to.
Right. So, however we're gonna talk about it, let's talk about it. But we can't just go, and we're done. That's what I say. There needs to be conversation. I'm not trying to be out of order.
When you stand on the table,
Right,
you
but
certainly are.
just as you were passionate, is just as I am passionate. So,
Not getting violent about
I'm
it.
not violent. There's no violence here. There's not one bit of violence. There's
I think,
passion
Sherman, you need
here.
to take
There's no
responsibility
violence. There's passion. So whatever we're gonna do, let's decide what we're gonna do. No violence, passion.
Then don't pound the table.
Okay, well then I apologize, but I wanna make my point, just as you made your point.
Okay. So, I mean, we can approach this however you want. I'm just looking at the recommendation was for a certain amount, and it was tied to line items. So.
I have a question.
We certainly can talk about it, sure.
So it was recommended to come up with a budget, of 1%. These items that you had given at the finance committee, which I was not sitting at the center table, but, those 14 plus items that I saw, were they out of this entire budget, items that you all suggested, or do you, because I think there's miscommunication when I asked a question. I heard that it was primarily, you thought it was gonna be taken from staffing or, not from the entire budget. Did you look at the entire budget
Yeah,
and look
so-
at some of the smaller, not smaller items, but like custodial or transportation or something like that?
Yeah, do you have the finance subcommittee presentation from the other night? Can we get up the slide around the parameters that we use
Because,
to come to these decisions?
I'm just saying you came with these 14 decisions, you and the team, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's what we were asked to do
Looking at
that.
the entire budget.
Correct, yeah.
Okay then.
Greg?
Tom, as I think about it, this $30,000 for the plus lot relocation, shouldn't that be in a similar budget revision as with respect to the insurance adjustment? Because the town has told us we can't relocate anyway. So aren't you gonna revise the
It's a moot
budget?
point.
Isn't it kind of moot that it's not gonna be in the budget?
Wait, you have to make a motion on the insurance.
Yeah, the motion would need an the insurance would need a motion as
Correct.
well.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
but, you're recommending that,
Correct,
okay.
correct.
You could choose not to do that.
So Craig, there was a slide around parameters that administration and,
no, it's not sitting there. I think it's your
Oh, you don't have a plug-in.
No, that doesn't
Yeah, please.
Sorry, there's a little,
that's all right. So one of the, what administration did is we tried to take the discussion that the board had on the 13th, and obviously there was not clear consensus at the table. We heard things such as some coaches, no coaches, all coaches. We heard look at non-certified positions, meaning other staff other than teachers. We heard takeaways around, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Do you have the slide there? I could just speak to it
yeah,
versus on the screen.
sorry.
It's all right. Least impact to students. What are we mandated to provide versus non-mandated? Look at class sizes at secondary and real reductions for long-term fiscal impact, meaning just to willy-nilly cut a random line and say, cut that with no basis for it, were the other themes that we tried to take away. So what administration attempted to do was to look at those 6 themes around coaching, least impact to students, mandated versus non-mandated, class sizes at secondary, non-certified positions, and real reductions for long-term impact. The list we came up to fit that criteria, again, it wasn't broad consensus, but using that as criteria, this is the list that we came up with to best meet the board discussion from the 13th.
So, we'll just step back then and take care of the insurance adjustment then. That'll be pretty easy.
So my motion dies for lack of a second.
Yes.
Yeah, well, why don't we go ahead and have a motion on the insurance adjustment, then we can roll that into the. Anybody care to make a motion on that, accepting this as an insurance adjustment for the budget?
I move that the board approves the adjustment to the insurance policies as presented.
Second.
$25,780.
$25,780.
Who's the second on that?
Who's second?
Amanda.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay.
That gives you a new bottom line of $50,983,055.
What's the percent now?
3.33.
So, that brings us back to the hot button topic. What does the board wanna do about this recommendation that we got from the committee? How do we wanna handle that?
Well, my preference would be to go over each of the recommendations and then take other recommendations. For example, I don't think that an increase in the legal budget of $50,000 is necessary.
Okay.
The board may feel differently. Certainly the administration does.
Okay, and the reason why I suggested it the other way is one lump sum is because that's the recommendation was brought to us, but I'm not opposed to discussing these line by line, and then if we need to have further discussion, that's fine too.
Well, it would save a motion to separate.
Yeah. That's fine. So, if we want, we can go through these line by line and talk about them. So, the first would be the bus lot road relocation for $30,000.
Move that we accept that recommendation.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Next would be the cost for us to provide busing to magnet schools in the amount of $25,504.
I move that we accept that recommendation and note that the superintendent advised us that he felt that Learn would pick up that cost and provide that service to the students and parents.
Just to clarify, none of these were my recommendations, but it has to come back with a plan.
Yes.
And on Learn, what I did was share experience that when we cut high school magnet transportation, the magnet providers did pick that up. I don't know what they'll do with RMMS.
Fair enough.
Just,
Right.
I know it's semantical, but I just want to
No,
know.
that's fair.
And that's true
It's
for
good to
any of
clarify.
this. We were presented with a recommended budget by the administration. And then we came back with options that, what if we had a 1% reduction in cost, what could be affected? It certainly wasn't a recommendation, it was just options that were presented. Next would be the cost of extending, the laptop replacement at Quaker LG Vogue. I'm sorry. No.
Motion on that?
I made the motion, we're waiting for a
Okay,
second.
did we have a second for that? To reduce the bank?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Go ahead, so I'm sorry about that. Next would be the laptops. This is extending out the cost of replacing laptops at Quaker Hill by 1 year, at an amount of $56,700.
I had a question about that. Is there anything in place so that, say God forbid, somebody's laptop,
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure that someone's not left high and dry without
Yeah,
access.
these are staff laptops, so yes, we'll repair and replace.
I just don't
as
want somebody to have to be
necessary
like, well, great, now I
once.
can't.
And this is actually two parts. This is the delay in the laptops at Quaker Hill and the refurbishment of teacher laptops from the high school going back into the classrooms.
Thank you.
Move approval of laptop cut as presented.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Marcia, and abstains. Next would be to cut one math coach at the high school, the amount, and it's an amount.
That's the high school.
I'm sorry?
It would be,
Oh, I'm sorry.
it would be
Cut-
at the elementary level.
Sorry, cut one math coach, and that would be in the amount of $73,546.
Move approval.
Discussion, comment, or is that after we,
Once we get a second, we'll have a discussion.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes.
Discussion.
For the last 5 or 6 years since the coaches have been alive and working in Waterford, coaching has come up at the board level at budget time. It's a big discussion, eliminate, keep, whatever. And then after budget season, it was never really talked about again. So I would not support cutting any coaches now, but I would ask that after budget season, the board and the superintendent find a way to have a more productive discussion on the role of the coaches, how their effectiveness is measured, and get some legitimate input from the professional staff, as opposed to hearsay or comments at the deli counter. I'd rather get some real professional, concrete, talk going on after budget season, so I would not support cutting anything in the coaches at this point.
I would add to the comments that I think it's important, to Marcia's point, is that however you're gonna get those comments, that they be anonymous, so people feel free to speak whatever their thoughts are without fear of getting in trouble or fear of backlash.
That's what I meant, I think that would be the superintendent's job to do, to find a way to do that effectively.
Okay. We have a motion and a second, so, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
And abstained?
I'm gonna abstain.
Caroline, do you need a hand count on that?
Probably, yeah. Probably do that by the show of hands, I should have said that. All those in favor?
Okay.
3 of us opposed? Okay. And
Amanda does abstain.
okay, so that one does not pass. And then, last item would be the addition of $50,000 for legal negotiations for, to add to our legal costs. You have a motion on that?
I'd like to make that motion because I think that one of our biggest concern is salaries. And if we always stop at arbitration because we're a wealthy town, and we always are afraid of arbitration and all of that, and without giving away negotiating stances, the teachers in Waterford do pretty well because of our wealth and the way we stand in the 169 communities. So if we're gonna take a hard line on negotiations, we're gonna need a bigger legal, budget. And so I'd like to make a motion that we add $50,000, because certainly our salaries are 80% of our budget.
Could you refresh my memory on what is being renegotiated next year that would impact this budget then?
Sure. In fall of 2020, so sometime around August, September, we'll be negotiating with the teachers union, every 3-year cycle. And I believe WASA as well.
That's the administrators.
Yes.
Yeah, because we did them both at the same time.
Oh, then that's the big tickets.
Those
Okay.
are our biggest ticket items.
I had a question about who came up with the $50,000 tag, so to speak, and what if it goes over, or what if it's not quite there? Right?
So that was an estimate from them.
That's an estimate from legal counsel, what it costs to go to arbitration.
Now, when you
Fees.
formulated the budget time, you were aware that these negotiations were coming up. This is not a surprise.
Correct. We increased legal by, I think, 15,000, Mr.
Correct.
Mancini,
Moved it up to 100.
anticipating negotiations. Arbitration would be more legal fees beyond just traditional negotiations, which legal counsel puts in place.
But the proposal that you had in the budget already anticipated that.
Anticipated negotiations, not arbitration.
Well, why are you anticipating arbitration now? We've always taken a hard stance in our bargaining position. And we've always had a realistic stance in terms of where we stood in terms of binding arbitration. And we've acted accordingly. Why would this be any different?
I think generally speaking, some of the discussion on the 13th, around sustainability, long-term future budgets and things like that. We're coming off 7 years of Board of Ed budgets at 1.5%, granted this year at 3.33, I believe it's now. You're looking at basically 4 items that make up 98% of that increase, being contractual salary increases, health insurance increase, transportation increase, and then the addition of special education paras and the 3 elementary teachers that the board put into this year's budget to address class size. I think the feeling was that from some of the board discussion on the 13th was those numbers, those negotiated contracts that led to this year's increase, the board, some discussion amongst the board is that that's not, I think the word used was sustainable. So administration, in an effort to protect the district from, not having a budget to meet the needs and demands of negotiations, recommended putting in additional legal money.
Well, my comments in terms of sustainability meant funding some of the auxiliary services for our teachers, specifically coaches. It wasn't salary. I mean, it is what it is in terms of what we can achieve in negotiations and what we're exposed to in binding arbitration. So I don't see any reason to change the legal line item.
It's
We're gonna have the
certainly
same
the board's
position going in and the same negotiation tactic.
We need to call for a second.
Let's get a second here, just for, even for discussion purposes. I mean, we're gonna have to vote on it.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on that?
Yeah, so the 50,000 is on top of the 15 that was originally budgeted, or can this be brought down to 35?
So we have a legal line every year. Board of Administration recommended in this year's budget increasing our normal legal line by 15,000 to meet the legal demands of negotiations. So that 15 is just for your normal run-of-the-mill.
Right.
What's the total bottom line for legal?
We're at
As proposed?
115 in the proposed budget. This
So you
would
wanna
take it
move to
from-
165?
Correct. This 50 would be on top of, we've commenced normal negotiations, and the Board of Ed made a decision to pursue arbitration. This would fund arbitration.
Okay, any more discussion on that? Okay, I need a show of hands on this one too. All those in favor of adding 50,000? Opposed? And abstained. Okay, so that is on pass.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Motion that we reduce the budget by $25,836 by not funding the school to career coordinator.
Can we have a second? This is one of those items that was proposed as an option. There's a new position brought to us during the budget. We have a second. I'll second it next first, so we have some discussion. Is there any discussion on that?
Discussion would be, this is a new position. Barely funded. We haven't approved the position. We don't have a job description. Seems to me it's
The board
something.
does have a job description that was provided to
He
the
did,
board on
he
the
did.
13th.
Have we approved it?
There's no mechanism within the board's purview to approve job descriptions. That's a function of the superintendent
Okay.
to approve the job description and then hand it off to HR.
It's a new position. My view is that we shouldn't be creating new positions in this type budget situation. And it's something that I think that guidance counselors could absorb or should absorb. One man's opinion.
Yeah, and I think, I indicated during the finance committee that I didn't support that. I would prefer to have deferred it. I think it's an important position, but I think, we should just push it out a year. That's my thoughts.
I'm sorry, what is the motion? What are we discussing?
To cut
remove it.
$25,836.
Cutting it, adding it?
Cutting it.
What, to cut?
Cutting the school
Okay.
career position.
Thank you.
Troy's like, wait a minute.
I guess my understanding was is that one of the reasons for this proposal was because the counselors could not absorb this and that they needed more time to work with kids in other ways and that this would help them work with kids in other ways.
Okay. Motion second. So again, show of hands. Those in favor of cutting this, position from the budget, proposed position from the budget, all in favor?
Aye.
This
Oh.
is cutting,
Yes,
correct?
to remove that. And then opposed? And abstain. Okay, so that also fails.
Could I ask for some information?
Sure.
In our finance meeting, Joe, you came up with the amount of money that we get for tuition
Yes.
and how it impacted the budget. Could you put that slide up by chance? Or can you at least give us the?
All my faith is in Caroline.
Because as I recall,
Yeah, I can
that-
speak to that a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're projecting
slides
with our
1 through 3.
relationship with our 3K partnership districts that we have, we are projecting 15 tuition-paying students next year for Waterford High School at a tuition cost of $12,230 for each student, which would be a tuition check of $183,000 and change to the town of Waterford General Fund. What's that?
183,450.
Yes, so, this current year, just to speak briefly about that, is, we received the town received a tuition check in the amount of $60,000
$60,000.
for this year's tuition students, which was 5 students. Partner district, was offered an additional 10 seats for next year's freshman class, and, we have 11 applicants for those 10 seats, and that partner district has authorized all 11 to be accepted into Waterford High. So in terms of an offset to the budget, Mr. Mancini, what does that amount to in terms of a percentage decrease in the request, basically?
That would be our next slide on.
There we go, right there.
All right, well, here, I'll touch on this first because there's a lot of different people in the room today. So as Tom said, for next year, we've already approved a tuition rate of $12,230 for every tuition-paying student from one of the K-8 districts. There's going to be 15 students that are here, 4 that are going to be sophomores, 11 that'll be freshmen. So the expected tuition is going to be $183,450 dollars. Now, this money is received directly by the general fund. You should see that reflected at the Board of Finance when it gets to them. Right now, the town's current mill rate is 27.98. I understand that that's gonna change with this year's budget, but my point of putting this on here was to kind of put this in a measure of equivalency. So, if you're talking about economic development, it would take a $9.4 million development to generate this much money for the town. $9.4 million is 1.5 times the development that's going on right now over on Minor Lane, whatever road that is over there. Next year, when I come back to you guys, you're actually gonna have a number that's gonna be higher than all of the revenue that Rec and Park takes in a fiscal year. So, I think there's a clear path to this ultimately getting up to about $1 million. Will it take 10 years? It could, but we're well on our way. Next slide.
But the point is that this doesn't go back to the Board of Ed budget.
Right.
It goes back to the general fund.
So, I mean,
This is what-
hypothetically, if we were gonna get credit for the tuition that, for the revenue that we've created, we would offset our budget by 0.37. So, we would have been asking for 3% with the reductions we've already taken, be well below that now.
And also, I think this is the last year of us carrying the communities to schools.
Now,
Right, that's
we-
in
we-
FY '21.
Yeah, but we're gonna see one more hit to our budget, right, 'cause that,
So that's factored into our budget as well. We took in a little.
Would it help the board to hear the new bottom line, given the motion so far?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yes, absolutely.
alright, so excluding, or already including, I should say, the insurance adjustment, you guys have reduced $138,040, which brings the 3.3% down to 3.05, or $50,842,315.
Wanna run that by me again, please?
$50,842,315.
Make sure we have the same numbers.
And that's not including
Not
the
including
tuition.
the tuition.
Right, because that does
So-
not go to.
So
So
could you
we're
take,
way
we-
under 3,
we go-
taking
So would
into
you take-
consideration
would you add the
the
30?
tuition.
or deduct the tuition of 0.37%?
So
And
how do
we
we
take
go?
off the,
So we're down at 2.7.
Yeah, that's
What
just.
do you have, 25,836?
and that,
These are all the cuts that you made.
We're at 3.5 million.
yeah, so the 25,836 brings you down to,
Jim, is there a way without compromising anything that you have on there to project something that you can project up there?
278.
1, 5,
954. Oh, wait, hold on. Is this 930 or 980?
930, because you
So
started
you took
here
off-
at 50,000.
What was the 50,000?
The legal,
Illegal?
that we didn't cut
We didn't-
from.
No, it was never put in.
That was never put in.
Oh,
Yeah, it wasn't, so he's not factoring that in.
No worries.
For clarity reasons, Joe, why don't you go budget adjustments to superintendent's proposed to what we have today based on the motion?
Okay, so in other words, the revised budget post-insurance is $50,980,355, which is a 3.33% budget increase.
What about including the motions the board approved tonight?
That is a reduction of $138,040. I really hope I get this right, Tom, we've been over this before. So bringing your recommended budget at this point to $50,842,315, or a 3.05% increase.
Okay. So that is,
This is what happens if you mess up.
that's the number we're at.
What from 3?
And theoretically, if you deducted the tuition from that, you'd be at 2.78.
6.8.
6.8, thank you. I don't have, thank you. I need the math coach.
That wouldn't be the number.
No.
Good thing we didn't cut that math, coach.
I mean, that's theoretical, I mean, actual is 3.05,
Right.
Right.
but.
But the town is getting that money.
Yes.
So anyway,
there's
Yeah.
theoretically, that money's going somewhere.
right,
Not theoretically, it's going somewhere.
That was the original.
so
After the,
A motion would be in order to approve, that amount, $50,842,315. As our final budget number.
Is it 980 or?
Well, 98035.
I move that the Waterford Board of Ed
That's,
approve the budget of $50,842,315.
is that right? But why does he have a
All right.
different number?
I don't know what he's doing. You went original submission minus
Okay.
health insurance and
As
that.
long as you tell me that's right.
Yeah, you're good.
Right, so
Plus,
Joy was good.
It's a lower number, so
Joy's
if I'm
number was
wrong,
good.
everything's good. Yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Further discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, more discussion. More discussion.
I have discussion.
Okay.
I don't agree. I think that I listen to what Greg says, that it's not sustainable. I think that when you look at all of these things, many people are passionate about this. I think that, I don't know that we're divided, but I think some of us agree on some things and some of us don't agree on some things. I think there's better ways for us to reduce the number. I think that Greg and I are gonna end up being outvoted, but I just want to say, I think that we can do it for less. And my passion of hitting on the table is not out of violence, it's out of passion. And it's out of wanting to say what my thoughts are and wanting to say that I think that we can do better. And if people agree, they can disagree, it's okay. I mean, that's what makes for dialogue, but I don't agree. I think that it can be done with less. And I think there's ways to trim it down and cut it down.
I would just add to that, that this budget was developed, and I think they did an excellent job in developing the budget, given the parameters that they were given to the administration prior to the development of the budget. So I think that sort of thinking needs to be presented, prior to going into, because we've given them fairly, I would say minimal direction, but we give Tom direction to say, here's how we're going forward, and he presents us a budget and does an excellent job of it. I don't think we return that much money to the town. I think it's a pretty accurate budget as far as how it keeps the schools moving forward and how it supports our strategic plan and so on, our mission. So in that regard, if we need to do a deeper dive into the budget, then that stuff needs to be given ahead of time prior to us developing the budget, I would think. Yes.
I give a great deal of deference to the administration and also to my fellow board members, and you influenced my thoughts. I had some thoughts a couple meetings ago that, yes, it's not sustainable, and let's look at a big ticket item. But I thought Pat's comments were very well founded in terms of we need to do it in a more measured way, and that influences me. And I think it's important that we as a board come together and support this budget. And I can support this budget request 100%, and I'm gonna vote for it. And I would urge all of you to fall in line and support the administration and this board in presenting this budget to the Board of Finance and the RTM.
I'd just like to say, I feel very strongly, as you know, that, and I wrote a letter to every board member regarding this whole thing.
And that was influential, Marcia. I thank you very much.
And precisely the points were that we did not give our administration any directives in cutting it any particular percent, or that we can't afford this. And then at the last minute, we're cutting off their legs and basically saying we don't have confidence in our administration to come up with what's educationally sound. The other thing is that I think if we are truly worried about the $3.20 that it's going a month that it's going to cost every resident of Waterford, that we start looking at a projected budget for more than 1 year. And I propose that in my letter as well. So the ideas that you're hearing here tonight were all brought forth in the letter that I wrote to all our board members regarding those issues. We need to start planning, if we truly are worried about our tax base, although it's less than $50 a month to every resident of Waterford. The average resident of Waterford is what a 1% increase is. And if we're truly worried about that, then we need to start projecting out, not doing it at the last minute. That's all.
I don't want my comments to be misconstrued. Tom, I think, and I say this, and it's not to patronize you or your team, I think that you folks do a great job, and I think that you do an outstanding job, and I'm not just saying it to say it, I really feel that. However, I think that it can be lower, and I think that it can be trimmed. So be it if going forward, we have to take a deeper dive to look more, but then we should start these conversations much further out, Marcia, to your point, and look at these things to see. But I think there's ways that we can trim it, and I think that it has to be trimmed. That's my thought. But I think you do a great job. I think,
Don't take it personally.
right, you guys do a phenomenal job, and I think the teachers do a great job.
I think the message probably for us and for everyone though is that we need to be a part of that process moving forward, and give the directive to look at a multi-year budget, to do that deep dive into, maybe is there overlap in positions, is there not overlap in positions, and next year, I think it's gonna be a struggle if the budget is, significantly increased, because if we, and that's gonna be really difficult for me to see, I guess, if there's a significant increase in budget and nothing was, looked at in terms of that deep dive. So if we can do that over the year in whatever way we decide, or you all decide, and together, it's probably the best thing. Because I can see here, getting all of this information that I've gotten, I can see that there are some districts that are doing it very well and doing it for a little bit less, or so in some cases a lot less. And so I would like to see what are they doing and try to really understand what are they doing, so that maybe we can bring those practices here, because we're doing a great job and it's wonderful, but somehow some of these districts have found maybe some magic in getting their numbers down a little bit. But
If you look at what you've given us, and you relate the dollar to the test score, the dollar to the test score doesn't equate, to Michelle's point, based on what you've given us, with some districts that are in our area that haven't been reported. So if you look at the difference, it's huge money, and it doesn't translate versus what we're paying our teachers to the score. So when you look at big ticket items, we all say it's all in salaries. It's not in the paras, it's not in supplies, it's in salary. So you give us the book, you look at the book, you look at the numbers, so you go, in all of our 3 or 4 meetings on this, and you go, what can you cut to get the number lower? You just look at big ticket items, which is salary. So if we're gonna do it, we do it. I said it before, send it up. And if they say okay, then okay, send it up.
To that, I don't want to rehash the budget presentations, they're posted online. $50 million is a lot of money, I'm not negating that. We're coming off 7 years of 1.5, which is extraordinarily low. When you look at 80% of your budget is around a 3% increase. I think this board, because after tonight it becomes the board's budget, it's no longer Tom's budget or the superintendent's budget, it's the Board of Education budget. I think this board has been very responsible for many years. To have an increase of 1.5 over 7 years, I think speaks volumes to the board's fiscal responsibility. In terms of equating, Waterford's per pupil expenditure is 81st out of 169. It's middle of the pack. $50 million is a lot of money. I'm not complaining. I think we do great things with that money. Our performance across the state is in the top third of the state. So middle of the pack in funding, top third in performance. I think that's I said in the budget hearings, that's a very strong return on investment. Does that mean our work is done as a district? Absolutely not. It'll never be done, as I said earlier in the meeting. But I do think the investment this town has made in education has been worthwhile for a very long time, and the plan is to continue that good work.
Anyone else?
I was just gonna say, listening to Pat's point, regarding the coaches and going forward and having a little more clarity around that, kind of hit home with me tonight also. I think we've cut 30.33%, which is good. It's a good start anyway. As Chris said, we could send it up and it might get hit back, who knows? I've contacted Tom with 5 or 6 different other points on the budget, and he was very thorough and adequate as far as answering some questions I had about those minimal things that can we look at, streamlining this, or like you had said, taking care, and it wasn't necessarily personnel, it was more things like how many online programs are you using? Do we have to use the same ISPs? Can we accomplish the same thing with different data storage things and whatnot? So, and they are looking into that. And then I asked about athletics, which I had touched on last year. Let's just go to one place, get a one-stop shop, and get discounts for everything. And he said they've selected, as far as selecting someone to be fiscally responsible there, so.
I would like to recommend that we approve this budget. I think we've cut whatever we could cut from the proposed budget that seems to be reasonable at this point. To everyone else's comments, we should have come up with it earlier if we wanted more cuts, right? The budget process does not do well when you rip the Band-Aid off. So I would like to get this approved, and let's take the time to ask the administration to really do these deep dives out a year or two so that we can look at what's going on, because I am with Chris. I think we can do it less. I don't think now's the time to cut everything, right? I think let's get this passed, because we don't even know what finance is gonna do. We could get this back and be asked to cut 5% more, right? So let's get the process going, and let's look to the future and see what we can do fiscally and still maintain what we have, and hopefully get better at what we're doing. Education costs money, so town has some hard decisions to make for the future.
I just wanna say that I think it's very important for the board to make a unanimous stand on our budget.
Yep.
And therefore, I will support this motion as part of the unanimous board, part of this Board of Education.
I'm not gonna support it. I'm just saying to you. I'm not gonna change. I understand what the goal and what the intent is, but I don't agree. So I'm gonna stand by my stance and say, that is how I feel.
And I'm just gonna comment, I get Michelle's point of looking at other districts, whatever, local, did you mean locally? I just caution against that because of where certain funding and whatnot comes from, because it really isn't apples to apples in a lot of cases, so. That's the only tricky part, is that, you know, I just hear that that's something we might look at, but it's kind of tricky to do.
So I really appreciate it, I mean, this has been a pretty stressful couple of weeks for us, but we've had some good discussion, a lot of passions all around, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, people on opposite sides, we can work towards the middle and come to a good resolution, I think, so. If there's no more discussion, we have a motion and a second in front of us for an amount of $50,842,315 to be our final budget amount. So, yeah, we'll do a show of hands on this. All in favor? Opposed? And any abstentions? So, passes in that amount. Again, just want to thank everyone for all your efforts in this. I know it's not been very easy, and I want to thank Tom and the administration right there. Very hard work, diligent work. So, a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Good night.